Carlos, let's start off with some general questions about COVID-19. Despite mixed reports about its utility, convalescent plasma treatment has recently been granted emergency use authorization status by the FDA. Can you tell everyone what convalescent plasma treatment involves and how does this differ from antibody therapies being developed at several pharmaceutical and biotech companies?
So convalescent plasma, Dennis, is taking plasma from somebody who's recovered from the infection, either convalescing, and then if that person has levels of antibodies high enough if in their blood, then to use that plasma and give it to somebody who has the infection as a way of treatment. There are a couple of issues that need to be taken into consideration here. Number one, not all convalescent plasma is created the same. So we need to be sure that those plasma has high levels of antibodies against the virus and preferably high levels of neutralizing antibodies. And not all places are testing. So just because somebody's recovered from the infection doesn't mean they have high levels of antibodies. We know from several studies that people who are men who are over the age of 60 and who've been in the hospital sick, critically ill with COVID and recovered, have much higher levels of antibodies as, say, somebody in their 20s who had a very mild illness, almost asymptomatic, let's say, or mildly symptomatic. They don't even need to be in the hospital. Those people have much lower antibody levels. But part of the problem is that the antibody tests are not standardized. So even deciding which is the right antibody, the right plasma to use is complicated. Number two is that assuming you have good plasma with high levels of neutralizing antibodies, the available evidence we have today is that it makes a difference if you give it very early on in infection. So ideally in the first 3 days after the onset of symptoms. And most of us know that very few people get seen or get into the hospital before 3 days of onset of symptoms. So plasma then offers limited use when you have somebody who's already 5-10 days into their illness and pretty ill. So there's still studies going on. I think plasma has a role, but I think the role is not as much as we would like it to be. I think that I'm much more excited about the monoclonal antibodies. I think monoclonal antibodies are essentially taking those antibodies in plasma, but really producing them at big scale. It's taking, your bicycle and turning them into a motorcycle. You're really going at a much higher speed, much higher levels. And I'm more excited about monoclonal antibodies and therapy. And again, not only for treatment, but also for prevention. We're about to start a study in which where there are two important studies happening with monoclonal antibodies through the CoVPN network. One of them is for people who have been diagnosed with COVID and who are not sick enough to be in the hospital, can we give monoclonal antibody infusion to prevent them from developing disease and getting better? And number two, can we give it prophylactically? In other words, if somebody's found to be infected, can we go to their house, test the family members, and those that are negative, give them the antibody as a way to prevent them from getting infected, very much like a vaccine would work. And I think monoclonal antibodies really have a significant future in the management of this infection.